How's it going, guys? Tommy from Where Switch 1000. Today is November 11th, 2020, and today we're primarily going to talk about two tropical disturbances which have a chance of impacting land, as Tropical Storm Theta is pretty much a non-factor in the Atlantic, as it's expected to die out in the middle of the ocean. So we're going to talk about Tropical Storm Eta first. So let's currently look at Tropical Storm Eta's IR satellite imagery, which is, and as you could see, it's pretty much almost about to make landfall at this point. I would say the eye right now is right around this point, just north of this convection, and also just south of the convection that's just to the north of it. And you could see it looks very ugly looking, despite being a 70-mile-per-hour storm and borderline a hurricane. It just looks very, very ugly. It does not look like a tropical disturbance. It looks more like an extra tropical cyclone, or it looks more like a everyday trough you would see in the winter. It does not look like a tropical entity, and however, it is still considered a tropical entity. It's not subtropical, it's still Tropical Storm Eta, and it's currently only a couple miles from land at this point, and it's expecting to make landfall within the next couple of hours. So yeah, it looks very ugly. You see that there's just not a lot of convection surrounding the eye. The western side of this storm has completely sheared off any sort of convection, as it's mainly dry for the most part, and we're seeing the little convection primarily towards the eastern portion of this storm, and it's as a result of the stronger upper level winds we're seeing. This is common in the month of November, where we see very strong upper level winds impacting a lot of these tropical entities at Tropical Storm, which is the primary reason why we don't see much tropical cyclones develop in the month of November. However, since this is a 2020 hurricane season and how active it's been, pretty much record-breaking in terms of how active it has been, since it just beat the 2005 hurricane season as most storms formed in one season after Tropical Storm Theta formed in the middle of the Atlantic. So because it's 2020, we're seeing that this storm be able to form into a hurricane at one point, but it has slightly weakened down to a tropical storm, as its millibar pressure has gone up to 989, and it's borderline a hurricane at 70 miles per hour. So definitely don't take this too lightly just because it's a tropical storm, because it's pretty much right there as a hurricane. It won't be anything major from the Florida coast. However, it is something to at least be it's something to be aware of, especially if you're along the immediate coast, where storm surge could be an issue along the immediate coast. So that's it for the infrared satellite. You can see just a very ugly storm. However, it's maintaining its strength, mainly because it's getting a little bit of baroclinic influence from this dry air that's behind it. Obviously, a dry air is more dense. It's cooler than the air that's circulating around the center of circulation, and since colder air is more dense, it wants to move into the lighter, less dense warm air that's circulating around the center of circulation. And that's part of the reason why this storm has maintained its 70 mile per hour strength despite looking very ugly on the satellite imagery. It's because it's been getting a little bit of baroclinic influence. And also, I will point out that while there is definitely wind shear impacting the storm, I wouldn't say it's anything strong. And in fact, it's quite rare that we don't see that much wind shear this up north during the month of November. Because if you take a look at the wind shear map, you see that while Tropical Storm Eta is in the yellows, around the 20 knot upper level wind area, it isn't in those reds, which is typical for tropical entities or low pressure systems to be in the month of November. So it isn't dealing with that much shear that would completely kill it off and make it lose its organization and strength within the inner eye wall. So this is why it hasn't weakened that much. However, it's still an ugly storm, and it's still expected to weaken as it heads towards the Florida coast. And one of the big reasons is because if we take a look at the GFS model and the and the relative humidity between the 400 millibars and 700 millibars in the atmosphere, you see that on the western side of this storm, there's just a ton of dry air that Eta has to deal with heading towards the Florida coast, and that will somewhat limit its strengthening and put a maximum to its strengthening and slightly weaken it, because although I said dry air is more dense than warm air, and that dry air is creating more somewhat creating more wind for this storm, there comes a point where the dry air becomes too much for Eta to handle, and it becomes up to a point where the dry air just stays within the center of circulation. And since the air is so dense, that means that within the center of circulation, not much denser air could move into it to replace that air, which means that the winds will wind down as a result of it. So the dry air will be an issue as this makes landfall, which will weaken it as it heads towards the Florida coast, and which is why it's been weakening for the past several hours. And another thing I want to point out too is the water temperature. So obviously we're entering the middle of November at this point, where we're seeing a lot of dips from the jet stream. We're seeing a lot of cold fronts and troughs move through the United States, and as a result of it, we're seeing colder temperatures. We see colder temperatures throughout the southeast during this time, and which definitely puts a dent on the sea surface temperatures all throughout the Gulf Coast, because you see, while most of the Gulf Coast is still above 25 degrees Celsius, which is around the 80-degree range, you see that the immediate Florida coast, the immediate western Florida coast, is now we're starting to see sea surface temperatures now dip down to the 70-degree mark, which isn't enough to completely kill Eta, but it is enough to slow its strengthening down, and it's going to come to a point where the dry air and the combination of just the lack of of latent heat from this ocean, it's going to come to a point where Eta won't be able to strengthen under these conditions, and that's what's expected as it's making landfall. However, considering that we're only pretty much a couple hours from landfall, any weakening won't make a major difference in terms of the impact, since it won't have a lot of time to weaken before landfall to create any noticeable difference. So pretty much throughout the western coast, and especially north of Tampa, prepare as if a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm is headed your way, because any sort of weakening will be minor, maybe down to 65, maybe 60 miles per hour if you guys are lucky, but I don't expect that much weakening before it hits land, unfortunately. So definitely prepare as if this is a Category 1 hurricane. Impacts won't be major because it's just a Category 1, but if you're along the immediate coast, you definitely need to watch out, because 3 to 5 foot storm surge is expected along the coast, and also flooding is going to be impactful throughout, even if you're more inland. So watch out for that if you're along the Florida coast. And in terms of the wind forecast for this storm, you see that looking at the recon data, you see that the wind is all over the place, because you would expect for a tropical storm to have its strongest winds within the eye wall, which is definitely typical. However, the recon data been measuring winds that are the strongest far out from the eye wall of the storm, as based off of this recon data, they measured the strongest winds well to the northwest of the northeast of this storm, which means that you won't necessarily feel the strongest winds if you're close within the eye wall, as the winds are pretty much all over the place when it comes, and it's very spread out. So if you're along the eye wall, I wouldn't fear too much that the winds will get much worse, because the winds, like I said, in the eye wall aren't much stronger than the winds you'll be feeling from the outside. And that could be a good thing, that could be a bad thing, because since the winds are so spread out, the inner eye wall will be weaker. However, since it's so spread out, the wind field also expands, which means that you're more likely to see a longer duration of winds. But when it comes to a storm this week, I'd rather have longer durations of winds. So then let's say the winds compact in the eye and create a much stronger storm. So I guess this is good news. However, the wind field is large, so definitely watch out for a longer wind duration event. And what's also interesting is that all the strong winds are towards the eastern side of this storm, as the western side of the storm, the winds are almost non-existent, as like I said earlier, the dry air has pretty much taken over the western side of this storm, and since the air is so stable there, the winds are light in that region, and all the unstableness and the instability is towards the eastern side, which means that you're going to experience the stronger winds on the eastern side of the storm. So watch out for that, especially if you're along the eastern eye wall. Even if you're like far from the landfall point, let's say in Tampa, where the eye is expected to make landfall just north of you guys, you still will experience probably sustained winds right around 30 miles per hour with wind gusts gusting well over 50, even if you're very far from the eye wall. So watch out along the Florida coast. And fortunately for those on the western side of the eye, you will experience you will miss out on the brunt of the impacts, which is definitely good news. But the eastern side of the eye, definitely watch out for stronger wind gusts, potentially up to 50, 60 miles per hour and 70 in localized areas. So prepare, take those things inside, and it could potentially be bad if you guys don't prepare for this. So looking at the storm surge map, while this isn't the strongest storm in the world, it's still borderline a category 1, and you will experience storm surge, especially in Tampa Bay, where the bay is very vulnerable to any small rise in the sea level. So 3 to 5 feet of storm surge is expected in Tampa Bay. So to put that in perspective, only 2 feet of water is needed to push a car. So if you're along the immediate Tampa Bay coast, or if you're along the immediate coastline of Florida, definitely watch out, because 3 to 5 feet is it could be quite devastating and could do damage much worse than you'd expect. Because think about this: the average height in the U.S. is 5'9", and 5 feet is borderline the average height of a person in the United States. So it could potentially drown some shorter people, some kids. So I wouldn't underestimate this storm surge at all. 2 to 4 feet is expected just north of the Anclote River, and even 2 to 4 feet is expected right around Naples, Florida, and extending as far down as nearly the Keys to 1 to 2 feet of storm surge. So watch out for that along the Florida coast. And in terms of the future track of this storm, you see that it's expected to make landfall within the next couple of hours. Actually, it should make landfall sometime early on Thursday, early Thursday morning. So watch out if overnight, because it could be the worst conditions for a lot of you guys. And then after that, it should completely die down, as there's just going to be too much wind shear for this to do anything beyond Florida. And obviously the water temperatures are much colder where the Gulf Stream is at this point, entering the middle of November. So the good news is that after Florida, this won't have any sort of re-strengthening ahead of it. So that's definitely good news. So now let's look at tropical invest. What's the invest called? Forgot, to be honest. Invest. Well, it's an invest. I'll just call it that. But here's the invest, and you could see it's currently just south of Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And you see that while there is a lot of thunderstorm activity, definitely more than what we're seeing in Eta, but it's definitely weaker, and it's dealing with a lot of wind shear at this point. And I'll show you guys why right now, because if you take a look at the GFS 250 millibar wind forecast at this point, if we go back to present time, you see that there's this huge trough in the middle of the Atlantic that's bringing some wind shear over Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. While it isn't a ton of wind shear, it's enough to shear this storm and to keep it from developing in the short-term future. So looking back at the inverse, you see a lot of wind shear. You see those clouds drifting to the west and the the east and the southeast, and it isn't very organized now. However, if we take a look at the 5-day tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center, you see that it has a low 30% chance of developing over the next 48 hours. However, over the next 5 days, the chance increases as the disturbance definitely has will enter an area where there's more favorable conditions, because this storm is expected to continue to move on to the west, and since it's moving to the west, that it's going to move away from the influence of this trough that's currently over the Atlantic, and it will enter an area where the wind shear is very light, the water temperatures are extremely warm, and there isn't a ton of dry air to slow this thing down. So it's pretty much just a recipe for development as it moves on to the west, and this could potentially impact land, because if we take a look again at the tropical at its formation chance area, you see that it's borderline right around Nicaragua and Honduras again. So that's definitely a huge worry, especially since they got impacted hard by Hurricane Eta, which made landfall as a Category 4 140-mile-per-hour storm in Nicaragua and brought tons of flooding, even as far south as Panama, impacting Costa Rica. Nicaragua obviously got the worst hit, and Honduras and Guatemala just got hit hard by this, because this moved slowly over the islands and then before turning up northward to Florida. So that's definitely a major worry. And what's even more unfortunate is that based off what the computer models are saying, the computer models are expecting this to strengthen not just a tropical storm, but potentially a hurricane again. Because taking a look at what the GFS model, I'm waiting for this to load up. It's not okay. It's a little laggy, but I could do with this. Yeah, it's very is that the GFS is pretty much wanting to strengthen this into a 969 millibar storm before it makes landfall somewhere between Honduras and Nicaragua, only miles away from where Tropical Storm Eta made landfall. So that's a huge worry, because now it's loaded up and you can see the GFS model is not holding anything back. It wants to strengthen this, and it's obvious why it wants to strengthen this. The wind shear is light. It's over extremely warm water that's not only warm at the surface, but warm with depth. If we go hundreds of meters deep, there's still a ton of warm water the storm could work with in this region, as it's typical for that region of the Atlantic to be very much warmer than much of the other regions. You see that a 976 millibar hurricane that is expected just off the coast of Honduras and going down to 968, which I would say is equivalent to a Category 2 or maybe a Category 3 hurricane, just making landfall just north where Hurricane Eta made landfall last week. So that's definitely a huge worry. Some hope however, there are some factors that we could hope for that could avoid a stronger hurricane landfall again around that region. We could hope that this wind shear dips down a little bit more, and then it slows it down a little bit and maybe turns it just northward, and the jet stream absorbs it to the point where it also weakens it, so Cuba and Florida might not experience the impacts. However, at this point, both of the computer models, the European and the GFS model, are favoring to strengthen this and take it straight towards Honduras and Nicaragua, again, just like Hurricane Eta. However, we're still 5 days out. It could change. However, at this point, I would say the most likely scenario is, again, a Central America landfall and a hurricane landfall at that, because I don't see much things slowing this down, unfortunately. I'm being honest with you. And I'm taking a look at the steering currents. The one hope we could hope for is that this jet stream dips, turns it up north and absorbs it and weakens it. However, at this point, but both the European Mall and GFS are taking the Honduras and Nicaragua pass, so that's definitely a worry with this storm. The only thing we could hope is that the jet stream dips, but the most likely scenario is a Central America landfall. So I would say definitely pay close attention to this if you're along Central America, and definitely prepare for as if a hurricane is going to make landfall again. So, but anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to share with friends and family who may be interested in this, who may live in Central America, or in Florida, any place pretty much, who may be interested in the weather. But I hope you guys have a good day and continue watching, and yeah, have a good day, have a good night, all that.